The effects of 9/11 are disputed and controversial, but many Americans, including those of the so-called 9/11 generation, see strong impacts and continuing trends.
I think that for most of us who were in fifth grade, fourth grade, it was a huge wake-up call for us and a huge shock. And from that point on, we became paranoid about terrorism. We became distrustful of other people. We sort of grappled with invading Iraq, and we sort of grappled with tracking down terrorists all around the world. And that has really characterized our adolescence and our teenage years.
After 9/11 came the Afghanistan War, launched on October 7, 2001, the Iraq War, begun on March 20, 2003, and what the Bush administration termed the War on Terror, initially waged against al-Qaeda after the attacks. The FBI has reported that hate crimes against Muslims increased 1,600% from 2000 to 2001 in the United States. And of course, the Big Apple was affected. For Jessie Cannizzaro, now a student at Swarthmore College, who was living with her family in New York City, she found a new sense of community through the tragedy.
It brought the city closer together and instilled like a real sense of pride in what we view as our home and how we protect our home and how we take care of our home. And I think it just really reinforced my view that, like, whether you're talking about New York or Washington or just America in general, like, is home. And no matter where you're from, you have to protect your home.
Meanwhile, with the U.S. engaged in 2 conflicts abroad, many Americans were sent to fight. Diana Mask, now studying at Susquehanna University, had a loved one deployed as a result.
My brother served in the military, and as a result, he's been sent all over the world and spent 18 months in Iraq. So that in itself had a profound effect because he was over there when I was young still, and I didn't want my brother going away. I didn't want him going somewhere dangerous. I have a huge sense of pride for what he did for our country and the service.
While some have been affected by military deployments, others have seen a different national impact. Alicia Goldberg, an 18-year-old at Sarah Lawrence College, is disturbed by the fear of terrorism she had seen spread throughout her childhood.
We definitely live in this culture of like seeing terrorism as an enemy, sort of like we saw the communists as the enemy from the 50s to the 80s, where it was like this big overarching thing and everybody was a communist, now everybody's a terrorist. I'm not as scared of Muslim people the way a lot of other people are. I'm more afraid of the people who are afraid.
Meanwhile, Becca Spiegel, currently studying at Colorado College, sees prevalent discrimination and prejudice against Muslims in the U.S. resulting from this fear of terrorism.
People's attitudes towards mostly Islam out of that has made me ashamed of that generalization that, like, all Muslims are bad.
Swarthmore Jr.'s Sachi Hopkins Hayakawa worries that this stereotype of Muslims echoes another historical event in the U.S. that runs close to home for her.
One way that I'm aware of 9/11 and that I'm not sure everyone is that as a Japanese American, it definitely has parallels to Pearl Harbor and the way that Japanese Americans were treated following Pearl Harbor. My grandfather was interned as a college student. He's an American citizen, but of Japanese descent. And so I think the Japanese American community was very aware of the kind of the racial repercussions this could have for the Arab American community. And so they were particularly sensitive to issues like racial profiling at airports.
On the other side of this worry is Sami Safiullah, a student at Vanderbilt and a practicing Muslim. He talks of the difficulty of growing up in a nation so obviously in tension with his religion.
I always thought of myself as an American, and now to suddenly see my identity as an American and my identity as a Muslim come colliding against each other was a very disheartening experience for me. And I think even until today, I still struggle with this identity issue. These days, I'm exhausted. I feel like my presence in society, in American society, is limited by the fact that I'm a Muslim, because I feel like I'm constantly apologizing for 9/11. Isn't that awful? I mean, what kind of society do we live in where people are taught to be defensive, to be apologetic for who they actually are?
Attitudes towards terrorism and Islam were popular subjects among those interviewed, as was the Bush administration's so-called War on Terror. Elliana Reuter, a sophomore at Swarthmore, believes the War on Terror was an inappropriate way to inspire national unity.
I disapprove greatly how we sort of went after it to redeem our pride. You can't do this to us without us, hitting you back 3 times as hard. And I think that was the wrong way to rally the nation around coming together and supporting each other.
Ross Adair, a senior at Swarthmore studying political science, sees the concept of terror as inherently abstract. He believes such a war is an impossible mission.
It's fighting just a war that's never going to end. At the time, people were so obsessed with getting revenge and making people know that the United States was still relevant and that we wouldn't be knocked down by this act of aggression. I don't see the war on terror as something that really can ever be won.
Max Bressman, now a senior biology major at Swarthmore, also sees the war on terror as a potentially never-ending war, but is more concerned with the money involved in such a fight.
Now we're in debt and we've been fighting a war way too long and we're getting involved in places we shouldn't get involved in my opinion. And the amount of money that we have to spend and the amount of money that we could be saving on those wars and using to build our own infrastructure, if we could have used, say, half that money, our debt would be significantly lower and we'd have jobs, we'd have a better ability to take care of our own people.
The children growing up in the wake of 9/11 obviously feel as though the day has impacted their lives, but they do not see it as a defining moment, and the majority reject the 9/11 generation label. Spiegel said she is not comfortable with the categorization.
I feel like it's a strange way to label a generation by a tragic historical event in a nation's history. I know that, like I said, I'm sure I can't ever count the ways that my life has been indirectly influenced by 9/11, but I don't think of myself or my peers as being defined by that event or its aftermath. I'm sure we've learned a lot from it, but so have all of the other generations of people who came before us and were alive to witness that.
Bressman was in agreement.
I think it's a stupid label, and I think that I have no identification with it whatsoever. I don't know anyone who has an identification with it whatsoever. The way I experience it among people who talk about it my age is kind of like, it's more like a historical fact at this point, because so much has happened in the world since then.
And Adair added a final thought.
I think it's changed a lot, but I think that our generation has learned a lot from it, and I think we're gonna be all right. I think we're gonna really be able to handle a lot of different stuff. So we're tough kids.
Child psychologist Dan Kindlin and clinical psychologist Lori Walsh have seen Adair's concept of tough kids play out. Kindlin calls them resilient, and Walsh feels similarly.
Most kids move on, which we often see after a tragedy. They get sucked back into their kid worlds, and they worry most about their own worries, what's going on the playground.
So yes, the 9/11 generation has, in a sense, moved on. As told to War News Radio, they undoubtedly see effects of 9/11, yet they choose not to be defined by the event. So what do they think defines them? Reuter has an idea.
I think that there are other things to look forward to. President Obama elected into office as the first African-American president. That's definitely another defining moment. I mean, there's light in the dark. And to define a generation by 9/11, I think is pessimistic. I think what a more optimistic thing to do would be to focus on all of the, incredible things that happened in our generation. And to remember 9/11 for what it is.
Hopkins Hayakawa also looks to other positives for the generation, including President Obama.
I think there's other things that I identified with Obama's election a lot more as a national event, because I identified with it being something driven by young people and people of color and that sort of thing. And so there's been other events that I felt stronger ties to on a personal level. I certainly feel like I'm a part of a shifting
relationship with technology that our generation has, and social media.
Many other students mentioned the impact of technology for our generation, but overall, they emphasized their desire to be categorized by something positive. Walsh shares some words of wisdom.
When we have something bad happen, whether it's to an individual person or to, society at large, we have a choice. And you can be viewed as the 9/11 generation and have that be your label, and then have all of the things that you feel and witness and do kind of related to that label. Or we can say, here's a generation of kids, and 9/11 happened to happen when they were alive. And then in that view, yeah, it was a horrible thing, and these poor kids had to have that shatter their childhood innocence. But it doesn't have to mean that every single thing that they go through, every reaction that they have, good and bad, is then related to that event.
And come from 9/11, it will not. With their heightened awareness of the world around them, this generation is sure to be defined in its own terms. For War News Radio, with reporting from Emily Bryant, John McMinn, Rosanna Kim, and Caroline Batten, I'm Elliana Bisgaard-Church.